Hello, my name is Bradley Armstrong, and for my fifth section assignment, I have put together a narrated PowerPoint covering the topic of the decline in the United States due to the environmental energy crisis and the globalization terrorism in the early 21st century. For a brief outline of this PowerPoint, the first topic that will be discussed is the environmental energy crisis in the 1970s. Then I will discuss the globalization and terrorism in the early 21st century. And then I will go over if either of these contributed to a period of decline in the United States. I will discuss how this relates to the conservative politics in this time period. And then to close it out, I will discuss how this relates to Reagan's America. The 1960s, along with the 1970s, was also known as the baby boom era. The government was responsible for protecting more and more Americans each day. This, unfortunately, was not being done. During this time period, pollution from factories and power plants invaded cities along with oil spills, raw sewage, and toxic dumps. American lives were being put in harm's way, and the environment was taking a very hard hit. In July of 1972, a picture of children was captured. These children were playing on a garbage dump. The children, who were the future of America, were put in harm's way as a direct result of the environmental crisis. In March of 1973, a picture was taken of the municipal dump in the New York Bronx area. This landfill reaches almost to the doorstep of a housing unit. Although dump already exceeds capacity, it continued to grow without anyone stopping it. In June of 1974, untreated sewage from Manhattan, New York was caught flowing into the Hudson River. This sewage contained raw and partially digested sewage and chemical and industrial wastes. This not only caused a direct stress to the environment, but it put many Americans in this region into harm's way. After some research, it was found that there were no regulations on the quality of the fish being sold in this area in local meat markets. The fish that Americans were buying could very well have been the fish that was caught in the sewage-infested water. Moving on and taking a look at the energy crisis that was going on around the same time, we can see that America really was going through a rough time. During a televised speech on April 18, 1977, Jimmy Carter stated, "With the exception of preventing war, this is the greatest challenge our country will face during our lifetimes. The energy crisis has not yet overwhelmed us, but it will if we do not act quickly." Looking at the picture on the right, energy consumption was increasing at an all-time rate in the late 1960s and hit an all-time peak in the 1970s. Looking at this next graph, we can also see that the U.S. before the 1960s, there was a relatively low production rate for oil. In the 1970s, the U.S. hit an all-time high in oil production. To put this into comparison, this is about the same amount of oil that goes on today. Taking a look at this picture, the energy crisis was also fueling the environmental crisis. Moving on to globalization and terrorism in the early 21st century, the first topic that will be discussed is globalization. According to 21stcenturychallenges.org, globalization can be defined as the process of change, increasing interconnectedness and interdependence among countries and economies, bringing the world closer through better worldwide communication, transport, and trade links. Now, a common question that a lot of people have about globalization is it positive or negative? Well, the answer is both. Providing some examples for positives, some positives that can come out of globalization is trading, country growth rate, and knowledge. Some negatives that can come out are wars and diseases. The next topic will be terrorism in the early 21st century. It did not take long for terrorism to strike the United States in the 21st century. On September 11, 2001, almost 3,000 people were killed in the crashing of two hijacked planes into World Trade Center towers and the Pentagon. Almost 9,000 people were also hurt in these attacks. Since that date, there have been around 340 people that have been killed due to new attacks. Taking a look on if these led to a decline in the United States, we can see that there was an economic recession during both of these time periods. One of the most notable recessions came during the late 1920s and the early 1930s, and it was titled the Great Depression. Another notable recession came in the 1970s, and it was titled the Oil Price Shock. This was a direct result of the energy crisis. Another recession came shortly after 2001. This was a direct result of the terrorism. Not only was the economy declining during these time periods, American lives and health were also declining. American lives were being lost due to the environmental crisis and also terrorism. Taking a look at the conservative politics during this era, Ronald Reagan, who is considered a conservative, stated in 1969, "In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem." Conservatives believed that the less government, the better off the American people were. Ronald Reagan also stated, "There's a clear cause and effect here that is as neat and predictable as a law of physics. As government expands, liberty contracts." He stated this during his farewell address to the nation, January 11, 1989. Because of the crisis that went on in the 1970s, Ronald Reagan's ideas made most Americans believe that America needed to be rebuilt. Taking a look at how this relates to Reagan's America, Reagan stimulated economic growth, curbed inflation, and also increased employment. Ronald Reagan's political stances tackled each one of these crises. In the environmental energy crisis, Ronald Reagan passed regulations and laws that pertain to clean water and clean air, along with a safe environment. During a Reagan-Carter presidential debate on October 28, 1980, Ronald Reagan stated, "I took charge of passing the strictest air quality law that has ever been adopted in the United States, and we created OSHA, an occupational safety and health agency, for the protection of employees before the federal government had one in place." Looking at globalization and terrorism, during his 2 terms he increased defense spending 35%, but sought to improve relations with the Soviet Union. This concludes the presentation. As you can see, the environmental and energy crisis in the 1970s and the globalization and terrorism in the early 21st century both contributed to a large decline in the United States during this time period, and as a result, conservative politics really thrived and prospered. Thank you for watching.